Well, we've moved on from that slide. We're now onto the agenda slide.
Okay, I'm disoriented now.
It is the right presentation, though, I promise you. All right. So, Cindy, I'll turn it over to you to get started.
Sorry, I was on mute there for a moment. So Jerry, so now I'm touching base with you. You've posted the agenda for all of us, right?
And this is the agenda that we have sent out, but we can add anything to it. I just put it up there as a frame of reference for everybody.
Perfect.
And as a reminder to everyone, if you've got background noise on your phone, if you'll press star 6 to mute and star 7 to unmute. So star 6 to mute and star 7 to unmute, and I'll put that in the chat box as well.
I did want to share a message from Catherine Scott Little before we turn it over to Oregon to share with us about their work. Catherine had a conflict today, so she wasn't able to join us on the call. But she did ask me to please send her regrets, first of all, and also to express appreciation both from Catherine and from Lynn to all the states who have been so gracious with their time, according to Catherine, and their willingness to talk with them about the project, the work that they're doing around the standards, and your willingness to participate in that process over time. She did want to be sure that everybody got a copy of the email message she sent out, which gives a little update for everyone, and then also asks us all to reserve January 22nd from 2 to 4 for a conference call to discuss this, the standards work, since we won't be having the face-to-face meeting. Is there anyone who did not receive that email from Catherine earlier this week? Okay, that sounds good. I will let her know that we are all on board, and we'll be with her in some form or fashion on the 22nd. So I think, Jerry, you've pretty much done a roll call. Do we need to do that one more time, or should we just turn this over to Oregon?
Well, I see that Maine has now joined us.
Okay.
J.C. Holmes, you're on, correct?
Yes, I am, and so Sue Reed.
Okay, great. So other than Rhode Island, who was not going to be on until 2 o'clock, I think we're all set.
All right, Oregon, you want to share with all of us a little bit about your work then?
It's good morning for us and good afternoon for many of you. My name is Jada Rupley, and I'm the Early Learning System Director. And with me I have Carol Williams, who is doing Early Education to K-3 Specialist, and Brett Walker, who is an Early Learning Initiatives Coordinator. And thank you for taking the time for letting us share a little bit of the work we're doing in Oregon. On your first slide, I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the work that we've been doing. And if I was going to use a watchword in Oregon, it's probably change, as we're looking at some very transformational things. And a lot of this has come through an initiative that was put into place by Governor Kitzhaber and our legislature, and we call it 40-40-20. And it's really addressing that 40% of Oregonians will have a bachelor's degree or higher, 40% will earn an associate degree or post-secondary, and 100% will hold a high school diploma or equivalent. And those are easy numbers to say, but I think that what is behind that is some of the work that we're doing, not only in the education work, but also in our business summits that we're looking at, as well as the legislature and the governor all speaking the same way. So I'd like you to picture with me 2 chairs sitting in Oregon. And the first one is the governor's chair that Governor Kitzhaber sits in, and the second one is the state superintendent, and he also sits in that chair. And that has actually created one of those windows of opportunity for us to probably do much of the transformation that we're looking at in basically the P20 alignment. He has reappointed not only myself, but Deputy Superintendent Rob Saxton, and a new board called the Oregon Education Investment Board that are really looking at how we can maximize all the work that we're doing in the education, and then falling into what we have is called the Higher Education Council. So under the governor's direction, he sees education as being one of his highest priorities, basically connected with healthcare on the early learning all the way through the P20 system at the other end. So what we also have in the P20, as I'm talking a little bit about some of the segments of education experience, we all know that we get busy in the work that we do, and oftentimes we have too many committees and not enough results. And I think that that's really what we're looking at as an outcome-based vision for early learning and K-12 in terms of starting with early learning in terms of stable and attached families, and then looking at children and families ready for kindergarten, and then third grade reading benchmark, which is why we're so excited to be able to join this group, because we know that we're going to learn from North Carolina and many of you in this journey. The other thing we're looking at is a coordinated system. So we're really trying to focus on the outcomes, and for once we're not going to say this is how you have to do this. What we're really saying is these are the outcomes we want, and how you do this within your communities across Oregon, you know best how to do that, and so what we're going to do is measure the outcome. We're looking at that in third grade, we're looking at that in kindergarten, and then of course as you see the 40-40-20 by 2025 is what we're looking at. So what I really like to do is focus a little bit on kindergarten assessment. It was a big lift by many people, and the legislature said we want the Early Learning Council to develop and implement a pilot and then work with the Department of Education to be able to implement statewide. So as you sit here looking at Kara, she is part of the group that not only created, implemented, and developed, but she's also the one who spent much of her time this year making sure that schools were able to implement this in a positive fashion. Brett joined us from the Boston Public Schools, and he's looking at how we're going to be able to move forward with this. So I'm going to let them talk about the success we see as the launch of our statewide kindergarten assessment.
Thank you, Jada. Today we're going to talk about the purpose of the statewide kindergarten assessment, the selection, pilot, and implementation of Oregon's kindergarten assessment, the fall 2013 kindergarten assessment, how it aligns with Oregon's learning standards, initial statewide results, the kindergarten assessment interpretive panel, which I'll elaborate on in just a little bit, or actually Brett will, and some next steps. So it's really important to set the stage. It's funny because this was a question that when we started this work up in early 2012, this was asked a lot. What is the purpose of a statewide kindergarten assessment? And so we wanted to start out the presentation by setting the stage for the purpose of this kindergarten assessment. The Oregon Kindergarten Assessment will provide parents, teachers, and early childhood providers with a common understanding of what children know and are able to do upon entering school. The common statewide assessment will also provide a statewide perspective that will allow us to track trends and progress over time. It's meant to help us answer questions like, are Oregon's children arriving at kindergarten ready for school? Is the level of school readiness improving or declining over time? Are there disparities, geographical, cultural, racial, and socioeconomic, between groups of children? And are there particular domains of school readiness that Oregon should target? We know here in Oregon that achievement gaps start early, generally before students even enter kindergarten, and that they are most successfully addressed early. The results of the kindergarten assessment can help educators address these gaps right away to assure that all children arrive at school ready for kindergarten, ready to read in first grade, and are reading at grade level in 3rd grade. To understand where we are today, it's important to provide some background information about the process that led up to adoption of the statewide assessment. As Jada mentioned, House Bill 4165 directed the Early Learning Council and the Oregon Department of Education to jointly develop a kindergarten readiness assessment to pilot in fall of 2012 and implement statewide in fall of 2013. A work group was assembled in November 2011 to bring recommendations for a statewide assessment to the Early Learning Council in July of 2012. This work group contracted with university researchers from the University of Oregon and Oregon State University, considered kindergarten assessments already used in the state and those that were used nationally. The group conducted superintendent surveys, community forums, and focus groups throughout the state, and then provided recommendations to the Early Learning Council in July of 2012. The Council adopted a composite assessment based on the Child Behavior Rating Scale and Easy CBM literacy and math measures. We'll talk a little bit more about those measures in just a minute. The kindergarten assessment was piloted in fall of 2012. 16 schools across Oregon were nominated and selected to participate in a fall 2012 pilot to study the process of implementing the selected assessment tools. The 16 schools included 13 school districts, over 1,200 children, full and half-day kindergarten, rural and urban areas, diverse race and ethnicity, English language learners, children with special needs, geographic and economic diversity, and large and small elementary schools. An evaluation of the pilot was conducted by Portland State University, and through on-site observations, surveys, and staff interviews, the evaluation provided us information about the type and training needed to administer the assessment, the time and resources needed to collect the assessments, modifications that might be necessary for students with an individual education plan, approaches for assessing children who were learning English, and the perceived benefits of and challenges to statewide implementation of the assessment. This evaluation resulted in key recommendations that ODE used to make significant changes and improvements before 2013 implementation. On March 8, 2013, the State Board of Education adopted an administrative rule that all school districts administer the kindergarten assessments beginning with the 2013-14 school year. So from August 15th through October 24th of this year, the kindergarten assessment was administered statewide. Within that time frame, schools established their own 6-week window within the wider state window to get a true picture of children's learning and development at kindergarten entry. Our kindergarten data entry window closed on November 1st, 2013. We consider this first year of statewide administration an operational field test. The pilot year provided us with information about the assessment process, but this operational field test year gave us more information about what the assessment measures, how the measures interact, and what the scores might mean. This first year served as a baseline year, and we'll take some time. Brett's going to share with you some of the results a little later. Before we got talking about the results, we wanted to share just a little bit about the measures that are included in the assessment. The assessment has 3 segments. The first 2 assessments in the early literacy segment are intended for all students. With the 40-40-20 plan in mind, English is the language of instruction throughout this child's education, and so all students, including English language learners, are given English literacy measures to establish a baseline of their knowledge and skills upon entering the school system. The literacy assessments are fluency assessments, which means that they provide information about how quickly and accurately the kindergarten student recognizes letters and sounds. Fluency is a strong predictor in later reading success. The early math assessment is also a direct assessment, and it is not timed. It includes measures in numbers and operations. And the third piece, the third segment, is one that we're really proud of here in Oregon, and it's actually an observational assessment called the Child Behavior Rating Scale. It's based on 15 items, and teachers score them based on observation of the student in the classroom during regular routines and activities. The scale focuses on approaches to learning, self-regulation, and social-emotional development. Here's a little more information about the Child Behavior Rating Scale because we get so many questions about it. So again, the teacher observes the student in the classroom on 15 aspects of the children's behavior in the classroom, and then for each item rates them on a 5-point rating scale. 1 meaning never, all the way to 5 meaning that the child always exhibits the behavior. From this scale, you can break out 2 sub-dimensions, which are self-regulation and interpersonal skills. This statewide kindergarten assessment aligns with Oregon's learning standards. The Head Start Child Development and Early Learning Framework was adopted as Oregon's early learning standards for children ages 3 to 5. The statewide kindergarten assessment includes assessments in many of the domains identified in the framework, such as literacy knowledge and skills, mathematics knowledge and skills, social and emotional development, and approaches to learning. Beginning with the 2014-2015 school years, Oregon will be utilizing assessments based on Common Core state standards for English language arts and mathematics. Our statewide kindergarten assessment also includes assessments that link with expectations set forth in the Common Core state standards for English language arts and mathematics. Additionally, we developed a toolkit for early childhood that helps early learning and development staff familiarize themselves with the standards and increase understanding of how to facilitate early experiences that will prepare children for success in school.
Good morning / good afternoon. This is Brett Walker. One of the things that we wanted to do is share some really high-level information that provides a look into what the state-level data tell us from the 2013 operational field test. We are going to be presenting the actual data next week to the executive team here in Oregon. So what we're giving you right now is just sort of a real high-level overview.
Teaser.
Yeah, it's a little teaser. The first thing that we want to point out is the participation rate. We are continuing to get some results in, even though that window has closed, and we're approaching 93% of all kindergarten students in the state participating in the assessment in the first year, which is something that we're really proud of, and I think speaks to a lot of the hard work that Kara led around the communication and logistical work. And one point of clarification is that those 39,000 plus students who participated are those that participated in each of the measures, and not just those for whom we have results on, for example, the literacy assessment, but not the other 2 pieces. The initial literacy data tells us that most students were able to identify some letter names in 1 minute, although there were many students who, upon kindergarten entry, could not identify a single letter in that minute time span. And roughly similar story for letter sounds. I'll get there in a second. On the early math, about half the students were able to correctly answer half or more of the questions. That data looks like a fairly even distribution across a standard bell curve. For the Spanish syllable sounds, we had 2,800 students participate this year. This was an optional assessment in the first year, and there's some work to do on this in terms of the communication with school districts on the type of on the way in which we're measuring Spanish language literacy. Spanish is the second biggest language group in our state, and we want to be able to assess what children are able to know and do around literacy in their native language upon kindergarten entry, and that's been maybe a little bit trickier than some of the other measures to hammer out. So that's something where we'll continue to work. And we also know that we need to clarify with schools what the purpose is and what the expectations are around that particular measure. The results from the child behavior rating scale, which are the last two bullets on this slide, were particularly interesting. Research tells us, as many of you I'm sure are familiar with, that the self-regulation piece in particular is really predictive of future academic performance. And so what we see is, averages on both self-regulation and interpersonal skills between 3 and 4 out of 5. What the broader set of data tell us here is that there are some children who are being observed by their teacher in the 1 and 2 range on those items that are on that assessment. So an example of that is student completes tasks successfully. So a 1 or 2 would be the teacher is never observing a child doing that or very infrequently observing a child doing that. So that raises some red flags if we know that we have some children who are coming in obviously below that 3.5 mark, and we know how predictive it is of future academic success. And that tells us that there is really important work to do around that and around linking the early childhood components and the early learning components to what's happening in kindergarten classrooms. So one of the hallmarks of the rollout of the kindergarten assessment here in Oregon has been ongoing stakeholder engagement and communication and interaction with folks out in the field. One of the things that we wanted to do once we had the initial data in was bring together a group of people from around the state to help us make sense of, okay, so what do we make of all of this? So in collaboration with folks from our data and assessment team, we put together what was called an interpretive panel that was really modeled off of a standard setting panel or the type of process that they would use when they're changing cut scores, for example, on a high stakes assessment. But because this is obviously not a high stakes assessment, we modified the process somewhat. So what we did is we brought together around 30 people from around the state, different practitioners, educators, K-12, early learning, different perspectives on the work, as well as representing different geographies from the state. Our state, like many states in the western U.S., has one big urban center, a handful of smaller cities, and then is mostly rural. So it's really important for those of us working in state government and who spend a fair amount of our time in the cities to make sure that we're hearing the rural perspective and what this means for some of the smaller communities that are much more isolated. So we really worked to make sure that we had not only the programmatic diversity of the people involved, but also the geographic diversity. We spent 2 days together, and that started the first day. The first half of the first day was really looking at the research around child development, early literacy and numeracy, and the approaches to learning piece to provide a really strong foundation for the people that we brought together and have everybody sort of speaking the same language and really having a strong understanding of where we were coming from with the design and the intention of the assessment. And then we spent the next day and a half basically sharing the initial data with them and prototype reports and asking them what's important for us to communicate to people out around the state around this. How do we share this data effectively with schools, with providers of early learning services, and with families? And what they came back with, kind of at the end of the day, were two sort of overarching sets of recommendations that you see on this slide, a couple of which had to do with using and interpreting the data. And a big part of what they came back to us was around how we network and communicate with the field. And some of the things that they were particularly interested in were the so what. So what are some of the interventions and strategies that we can use for children who are coming in below where we'd like to see them on the child behavior rating scale, or who are coming into school with not being able to name a single letter. And also one of the things that was really encouraging was a desire for shared professional development between early learning and kindergarten teachers. And one of the really big, exciting, sort of positive things about this 2 days was, first, there was a lot of really positive energy around the kindergarten assessment. And while I wasn't here, while plans were being made, I'm sure Kara would tell you that there were, maybe some mixed feelings about what a kindergarten assessment would look like in our state. And then the other piece that was really exciting for our work with all of you folks who are listening is that one of the things they said is, okay, so we've put this kindergarten assessment in place. What would be really great now is if we could have some type of formative system that would allow us to really inform instruction, because the kindergarten assessment is a snapshot moment in time that captures where kids are at kindergarten entry, but then what happens next. So that was a really exciting and sort of unanticipated outcome of this interpretive panel. So one of the ways that we talk about how data from the kindergarten assessment can be used is what we call the look forward and the look back, which I'm sure is terminology that other folks use as well. So this slide just provides sort of a high-level look at how data from the kindergarten assessment may be used for the look forward and look back purposes. So by different levels of the educational structure here in the state. So at the state level, data from the kindergarten assessment help us measure progress over time. So the 2013 data help us establish a baseline, and we'll see where we go from there. And as Jana mentioned kind of early on in the presentation here, making sure the kids are coming to school ready for kindergarten and that we're ready to meet them where they are when they come in the door is one of the high-level outcomes for our early learning system here in the state. The data can also help the state target resources and supports both for schools and for what are called early learning hubs. We're in the process of reorganizing how early learning and early childhood services are set up and organized around the state, and that looks like basically regional coordinating bodies that are designed to pull together the resources and facilitate the collaborations that need to happen at the local level. And those early learning hubs are really just coming online right now, and we're setting up that system over the course of the next year. And those groups may use data in some similar ways to the state, looking at measuring progress over time and targeting resources, strategies, and interventions. And then at the community level, schools may use data to help inform instruction, at least initially, and we hope that pre-K providers will help align programming and curriculum design and things like that to the things that we know are important and that we know we're assessing. So, for example, there's been a conversation around the level of test security with the kindergarten assessment, and do we need to be applying the same level of rigor with this assessment that we would apply to a high-stakes assessment? And for something like the Child Behavior Rating Scale, which is publicly available, you can Google it, it'll pop right up. The answer is, well, these are all the sort of social, emotional, and self-regulatory skills that we want to be teaching kids. So there's no reason to be keeping this a secret. We want, to use the cliche, teach to the test. That's what we want to be doing on that. So even the tools themselves can provide some real guidance to pre-K folks. So in terms of next steps, here are some of the key next steps. Obviously, moving forward with the formative assessment work is important as well. And we'll also be, doing the initial data release here starting next week and then over the course of the next several weeks. And one of the key parts of that will be providing some technical assistance around using the initial regional kindergarten assessment data for our early learning hubs. And along those lines, the connection between the kindergarten assessment and our healthcare agencies here in Oregon is really important. The Early Learning Council and the Joint Health Policy Board have established kindergarten readiness as one of their key outcomes. So we think that's really important, that folks on the healthcare side have said that kindergarten readiness is a key outcome for healthcare providers. And now what we need to do is figure out how we best work together to make sure that we're coordinating our efforts. And then finally, ongoing stakeholder engagement. That's something that will continue to be important in our work as we roll out the kindergarten assessment and as we work with all of you to develop the K-3 formative assessment. And in fact, next week, Kara and I will be talking to folks from around the state about what this work that we're all doing together is going to look like.
So one of the things that we know before we ask of any questions is Brett described the look forward and the look back. And in the look forward, we've also implemented another mechanism called regional achievement collaboratives. And those are actually a P20 mechanism that they're going to be also looking and measuring outcomes. So they will have the community colleges, universities, K-12 schools, and early learning are all sitting together having those discussions. And we all know that you can put policy into place and test into place, but unless you put people in a room together and have that conversation. And then, of course, the look back, the hubs, as he described. So those are kind of the two major vehicles that we are looking at to implement some of the changes that we're making. But one of the things that happens is just as when you get a success in terms of we feel like the rollout with the kindergarten assessment, what you realize is what needs to come next is probably most important. And so in those conversations, we've talked about what happens at the end of kindergarten, first, second, and third grade, which is why we're very excited to be a part of this group. And then I think the second one that came up is how is it that we even look at 4-year-olds in the same kind of way so that when they get to the doors of kindergarten, this isn't a test that they don't expect, that they may have had some of the practice effects and a number of things. So we're also having a great conversation with the University of Oregon and EasyCBM in terms of how that might look too. So that's our presentation. Thank you, and we're open for questions.
Hi, this is Sue Reed from Maine. Hello?
Great, go ahead. We heard you.
Can I just ask why you didn't look at a language or vocabulary assessment?
Well, that's a great question, and we in fact did. In fact, we looked at a very comprehensive list of assessments. We looked at assessments that were used both in our state by schools already in our state, and then we also looked at assessments that were used nationally. While we certainly did look at that, one of the things that we heard very clearly when we went out and did community forums and focus groups, when we talked with teachers and administrators, is that time was extremely valuable and extremely limited in the classroom, and that one of the major considerations that we needed to make sure we considered was that fact, that the kindergarten assessment needed to be quick, it needed to be succinct, and teachers needed to be able to get on with the business of teaching. So for those reasons, we really looked very, very carefully at what skills we could really distill, really look at that would be highly predictive of future outcomes. And certainly fluency measures in literacy and in letter names and letter sounds really rose to the top as those that were really critical and are ones that we could distill. They were very fast. They both take a minute apiece, and we could get some really good research-based information. Vocabulary is absolutely important, but those are more lengthy assessments and just wasn't in the cards for this assessment.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Oregon?
This is Suzanne at SRI. I was wondering if Oregon could elaborate a little bit more on the connections they see between the work that they're doing now and the enhanced K-3 formative assessment that we'll all be developing and working on.
So actually we're all three sitting here looking at each other's. We're excited to see what that journey might look like, but I don't know that we could answer. I think that we bring some strong experience to the table in terms of statewide implementation of an assessment, but we're also knowing that in the next 4 years that there are many things that we may need to do differently.
That's a great answer. I mean, obviously, thinking about how each individual state will be implementing, but also the flexibility to realize that where you are now and where we all may be 3-4 years from now is not necessarily the exact same place. So,
right.
Thank you.
This is Kelly Maxwell from Child Trends. Could I ask if you, from your experiences, have lessons learned for us about stakeholder engagement, things that we should be thinking about?
Yes. Yes. We had a very quick rollout. If you looked at the timeline carefully, we started work in November 2011 and started a pilot of the assessment in September of 2012. So yes, and during that time we had a mad dash. Stakeholder engagement was put first and foremost. We organized community focus group, community workshops, focus groups. There was a lot of stakeholder engagement, and absolutely we have lessons learned. We have things that worked really well for us, and things that we would be able to say we could have done better. And we're still continuing to do that. As Brett mentioned, the interpretive panel that we brought together for that work and looking at the data was incredibly useful. We anticipate that we will be pulling together a kindergarten assessment, a group to help to continue to advise us. So we have lessons learned, and we are continuing to learn.
One of the things that we probably would say is that we feel like from the state perspective that this is a snapshot of kids as they walk through the doors of kindergarten, and we have a lot of input and kudos to us that it was quick, it was easy, and that they know that they can use their curriculum-based assessments and all other things for formative. So we learned from other states that implemented probably, as we all tend to do, what about this, what about this, what about this, and it becomes a long, lengthy assessment. So we're pretty much advocates of the way that you look at from a state perspective in terms of quick and easy, and then move on to the next steps in terms of what they do with curriculum-based assessments.
Thank you. That's a great lesson.
Any final questions before we move on to the next part of the agenda? Well, if not, Cindy, I will hand this off to you.
All right. Thank you, Jerry. Let's see. So, before I begin, I have to say that, so this is the second opportunity we've all had, me in particular, to listen to others. And I am humbled, truly humbled at the experience and the expertise that all of you bring to this conversation. I'm only just beginning to understand the breadth and the depth of that. And so, and then I go, okay, so, here's North Carolina. We've just begun to walk the road. But I also want you to know that I find great comfort in knowing that others have walked the road North Carolina is walking now, and that you all are still standing. I have to chuckle, Oregon, about your timeline, because we're walking a similar road here. And so it's good to know that these things are possible. All things are possible. And so it's, it is really, I am so grateful to have the opportunity to listen to other people talk. And, I'm sure other states have a similar perspective that, some of your comments I know are echoed in North Carolina. I expect they're echoed in other states as well. So let me kind of, I did want to take an opportunity to just kind of update folks on where we are at, and I'm going to kind of skim through some things we've talked about before and then talk a little bit about stakeholder engagement in North Carolina. And Jerry, if I push on this full screen here, what's going to, okay. Is that all right? Jerry, you can undo that when the time comes, but I realized you might not be able to read all of the text on my slides without this.
Well, and everybody does their own kind of full screen or not full screen, so you can.
Okay, so people may or may not be able to see.
Yeah, so people may want to put it on full screen if they need to see it a little better as well.
Okay. So I think folks have pretty much heard North Carolina talk about this approach they've taken to their assessment design and the task force that includes multiple components. You've heard us talk about our think tank that started our process, a group of scholars and scientists and practitioners from across our state who all got together and helped the department look at the literature and the research and helped us with a framework for this assessment, and they helped us define what was essential. What does the literature say is essential for children in these grades, kindergarten through third grade, to know and be able to do. And they crafted claims around those essential components in the 5 domains, and ultimately submitted a report to the superintendent. And I think all of you have received a copy of that think tank report, so you kind of know what the foundation is for the work of the next piece of the task force, what is occurring at the present time, that assessment design team. You've heard me talk before about the assessment design team that is operationalizing that framework that the think tank has provided for us, and helping the department to think about how do we measure these constructs, these claims that the think tank has put forth. The assessment design team is made up of our staff as well as content experts who are bringing additional expertise that we needed to more fully address the 5 domains. And we're right in the midst of developing learning progressions around some of the constructs contained in the claims, with a focus right now at entry into kindergarten. That's where we've started because of timelines in North Carolina. We too have a pretty short timeline with implementation in 50% of our LEAs in the fall of 2014. And so, we're approaching that as I like the term operational. We're looking at that as a pilot, much larger than what we originally had hoped for, but we're finding a way to do that. The other component of the task force, the implementation design team, is the group that will help us think about, once we have this assessment fully developed, we've been through our piloting, our usability, our testing, and we're ready to implement statewide. This is the group that is going to be helping us think about implementing this assessment statewide in a manner that is sustainable over time. The implementation design team members are being identified as we speak, and meetings will begin right after the first of the year. At the center of all of this is our stakeholders, and so that's what I wanted to spend a little more time talking about today. This is the group that, groups, because we've talked to a variety of people. These are the folks who are helping us think about what are we currently doing out in the field around assessment in the early grades. How's that look? What are we gathering from that process? What information do teachers gain from the assessments that they're currently utilizing? What are those? Which assessments are being administered when? And then what is it that we need that we don't have? And how might we best gather that information? So we've had a series of efforts that are ongoing to gather input from the field. So I did want to add a piece about the assessment design team, talked a little bit about membership, our content specialists. We're in the midst of our first review process. We have some content experts that are conducting reviews, as well as teachers and some individuals who bring particular technical expertise, some related to psychometrics, some related to special populations. So we've got a variety of people that are looking at the first pieces of our assessment. I think everyone would be happy to know that Catherine Scott Little, bless her heart, is guiding our development process. She's really helping us think through this design process, and she's facilitating the meetings and facilitating our planning and helping us think about questions that we want to ensure we ask or ponder as we go through the development. And then we also have Margaret Heritage, who is our content expert in the area of formative assessment, and she's guiding our development from a formative assessment perspective. So now a little bit about our stakeholders and what we've been doing, who we've been speaking to so far. So we had a series of teacher focus groups across the state. In our first round, we utilized a sampling framework in an effort to get representation from a variety of districts across our state. And we ended up speaking with teams of teachers from about a third of the districts in our state. We invited a team from each district, pre-K, K1, 2, and 3. So we had a team of teachers come from 36 different districts. We held focus sessions in different places across the state. And then with the teacher focus sessions, we tried to gather information from teachers about classroom practices. Again, what's happening in the school from a teacher perspective. How are you gathering that information? How do you utilize the information you're gathering from these various assessments? How does that inform what you're doing in the classroom? We've had a similar process with school building principals. Again, sample of administrators from different districts across the state, different locations, urban, suburban, rural, some of our low-wealth districts as well as our wealthy districts, and also some of our highest achieving districts and some of our lowest achieving districts, and everything in between. Similar sorts of questions from a building level perspective. Questions about principals' perspectives on assessment in the classroom and information that is being gathered, what sorts of supports they believe teachers need in this area, how that information is being used within the classroom, within the grade level, across grade level, vertically, horizontally, to get an idea, again, of what's working in schools from a building perspective and what could we do even more effectively. We are in the process of planning focus groups with families right now. We'll be holding those after the first of the year. We really see this as an opportunity to strengthen the relationship between school and home. You know, in North Carolina, I don't know if this is similar for other states, but you know, we have some systems and structures in place that ease that transition from home to school or from early childhood programs to school at entry into kindergarten. We have some structures in place. There's some registration. There's usually some orientation sorts of session. There's usually some sort of open house, screening, a number of opportunities for families to connect with the school and in some instances even with the classroom teacher prior to school beginning. After kindergarten, we really don't have those sorts of structures in place. And so while we may have some opportunity for teachers and families to talk at entry into kindergarten, we're looking at this as an assessment as one strategy that might support ongoing conversations across the grade span, kindergarten through third grade. We also believe strongly that families have a great deal of information that they can share with teachers that will help teachers better understand children entering into their classrooms. And we also know that families are really interested in learning from teachers. So when we talk to families, we're going to be talking with them about a couple of things. One, we want to talk with them about what information do they think collectively they have that they're confident should be shared with teachers. And we're doing that we're holding focus group sessions that will be some that will have mixed groups and some that will have that will be targeting specific populations. So we want to have focus groups with some African American families. We expect them to have a particular perspective, and we also want to have focus group sessions that target Hispanic families, expecting that they may have some perspectives that might be different, and focus sessions that target white families, as well as, again, some focus groups that have a mixed group. We also want to hear from families about what information would they like to receive from this assessment process. We know that families believe they can support their child's growth and development. We want to hear from them about some specifics. What ways could this assessment inform what they do at home to support their child's development? And then we have every opportunity that we can find, we utilize as an input session. So if we can get on a conference session, if we can deliver, at one of the many venues that occur across the state, if we can sit in on a director's meeting that someone in the department might be hosting, if we can participate in regional roundtables that bring together representatives from our State Board of Ed regions, if our field-based consultants can get on a principal's agenda in an LEA, we're doing that every opportunity we can as a way to share information about what we're doing, where we're at in the process, and also an opportunity to get input into our thinking and into our planning. And then the last thing that we've done is to establish a state-level advisory group that is made up predominantly of teachers, again, preschool through third grade. We also have included some representation from building administrators, central office, exceptional teachers who work with children with disabilities, as well as English learners, and family representation on our state advisory group. So, similar to what Oregon talked about, an ongoing effort to be talking with the field, to be gathering input from the field to inform what it is we're doing. And I think it's, the opportunities that we have to meet with these various stakeholders are really helping us inform our vision. Of course, now I can't make it advance.
Is that not the slide you want to be on, Cindy?
Okay, so now I'm moving into the vision, and I'm hearing music play in the background.
I wonder if somebody's put us on hold. That's usually what happens.
Okay, so I'm just going to...
What I can do is mute everybody.
Okay.
And that will... So when I mute everybody, Cindy, you want to press *7 to unmute yourself. Okay. Oh, it's gone now. Keep going.
Okay. All right. So I can keep going?
Yep.
Okay, great. So again, we're looking at our stakeholder engagement process as a way to keep helping us refine our vision. But it is through the conversations that we've had with the field, with teachers, with administrators, in our input sessions, and Sorry, I can't do two things at once. These are the folks who are helping us, reminding us that we want to stay focused on a formative assessment process. North Carolina has, has implemented benchmarking assessment statewide in kindergarten through third grade, focused primarily on literacy development, reading. We've also, of course, we have our end of grade assessment that begins in third grade. We also have some summative assessments that occurs at the end of kindergarten, first and second grade. We really haven't yet put some structures in place to support formative assessment. So this is an opportunity for us to do that, to keep focused on the purpose of this assessment being to inform teaching and learning, both for teachers and for students. And for us, that means that it's an assessment that is a part of daily instruction. So, Oregon, I heard in your conversation one of the comments you made was how important time is, and that it was a major consideration in your thinking about the items or the content that would be covered on your kindergarten entry assessment. And one of you said that that was important for teachers, and so that they could complete this assessment at entry into school and then get on with the business of teaching. And that's pretty similar to what we're hearing from the field. What we'd like to do with this formative assessment process is help remind teachers that assessment is a part of the instructional routine. The assessments that we're currently using right now in North Carolina really do require one-on-one administration in an isolated sort of setting, and what we're talking about is an assessment that occurs as a part of the instructional routine that teachers do on a day-to-day basis. And we want to encourage teachers to think about the various ways that they gather evidence of student learning in that instructional routine, through their observations, through their interactions with students, with particular tasks that they design for that purpose, with work samples that they collect, anecdotal notes, photographs of constructions, that there are a variety of ways that they're collecting this evidence, and that evidence can come from a variety of sources. Certainly the teacher is going to have a role in that. We'd like families to have a role in that, pediatricians to have a role in that. And when children are working with other people in the building, if there are specialists involved, the health and PE teacher, the social worker, that they have, that they're able to contribute to that as well. And so similar again to what we heard from Oregon, when we talk about the kindergarten entry assessment, we're in North Carolina looking at that as the first administration. So we too have heard this concern from teachers about time, the amount of time it takes to assess and how they can't teach. We're having a pretty significant backlash in North Carolina K-12 around the issue of assessment and the amount of assessment that teachers are being required to do for various purposes, and how much of the instructional day they're losing to that. So we're very aware of that, much like we heard earlier in the call, and we've taken that into consideration as we've thought about this initial administration of the K-3 assessment. We do have this requirement for a KEA. For North Carolina, it's, we're thinking of targeting those skills that are predictors of later success in school and in life. We have to have, the teachers will have to administer that to all of their children within the first 60 days of school. We have some requirements related to reading and math. So we have a series of requirements that that we know have to be addressed, and we're trying to keep in mind what we've heard from our teachers. And I think apparently what others are hearing as well. So I say all of that just to give you an idea of where we're at right now in our initial administration of that K-3. So the way we're looking at our KEA is this is the first administration of a process, and it's what we do during the first 60 days that will be continued beyond that. So when we looked at the claims, what we've done is to deconstruct those claims. We've identified constructs within those claims in the 5 domains, and then we've targeted a few of those at this point in time to be included in our kindergarten, that first administration, our kindergarten entry assessment. So I wanted to share these with you just to give you an idea of where North Carolina is at right now. Much like we heard earlier, we're trying to keep this fairly targeted. It's interesting that we heard the question about vocabulary because we've had that question in North Carolina as well. Vocabulary will be part of the kindergarten through 3rd grade process. It's just not within that, it's not something that we're targeting right now for the first 60 days of school. So what you see on your screen are constructs that we've identified to prioritize, that we are now in the process of designing learning progressions for each of these, and then we'll be developing assessment situations or tasks to help us get at where children are performing in relation to these. And the last slide here is just wanted to share with you a wiki that North Carolina is using. It's one of several strategies, but it's fairly accessible to people outside the state. Where this is one of the ways we're trying to keep the field informed of our progress and where we're at in our design. So I wanted to share that with others so that when you're looking for something to do, because I know we're all looking for something to do, we don't have enough to do otherwise, there's a URL and you can spend some time familiarizing yourself with some of what's going on in North Carolina. So that's the end of my presentation. Are there any questions specific to North Carolina before we go back to the agenda? So Jerry, let's see if I can make it go back to slide 2.
Oh, I'll put it back.
Okay. Thank you.
That's what I'm here for.
Yay.
Technical issues.
So if there are no questions, then we want to talk a little bit about Tier 2. So we've spent time in previous calls talking about different levels of participation for consortium states in our piloting and field testing process. We wanted to talk, we'd asked for some information from all of you, and we wanted to take the time to talk a little bit about our thinking at this point in time for Tier 2 participation and what that might look like. So I think I'm going to turn that over to SRI. Are you there, Susan?
Sorry, I'm on mute. I'm sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yes, ma'am.
Jerry, I didn't know whether you wanted me to just talk through this or whether you wanted to, I have a few slides I can pull up.
Oh, okay. If you've got slides, that would be great. Let's see. Let me promote you so that you can manage everything. And I guess you could just share your desktop and show the slides that way, or I can If you send them to me, I could upload them. What's your preference?
I'll just do it from my desktop. That's fine.
Okay. I'm promoting you right now.
It's asking me to run something, so we have a little bit of a delay here. It looks like it's going very quickly though.
Okay, good. So you can be talking while it looks like you're set.
Okay.
You're clearly a professional at this, Suzanne.
Well, it's so many different systems that we work. Different projects work on different systems.
Mm-hmm.
So a little bit of this is a review, but basically what I wanted to do is to remind folks which activities we're talking about in Tier 2, to talk a little bit about the responses we've gotten from states and their interest in the Tier 2 activities, a little bit about how much we actually think it will cost, given that we're talking about involving additional states beyond the 5 states that were budgeted for in the application, and then to talk a little bit about what our process is going to be in terms of figuring out which states fit into which categories, if you will. So just a quick reminder, we shared this information with folks before, but we had divided some of the state-based activities, the consortium activities, into Tier 1 and Tier 2. The Tier 2 being the more labor-intensive or more involved, if you will, and specifically within the Tier 2 activities, we were particularly concerned about the pilot test activities and the field test activities because concern maybe isn't the right word, but those were the activities that were going to require the most involvement within a state, involvement in terms of state staff, of individual school districts, individual school staff, and so, if you will, as I referenced before, the most labor intensive. The Tier 2 activities also involve convening state experts and going more in depth in stakeholder engagement activities. But as we thought about this in terms of the possible additional cost, we felt that most of the cost was in the piloting of the items, the technology, the report formats, and then in the actual field test of the entire assessment. And we had shown you before a little bit more of a definition of these activities. But what I want to move to here is what we've been tossing around for the last couple of months, which is this issue of cost. So again, the original application we budgeted for 5 states. And what we did is we allocated $75,000 per Tier 2 state for each of those 5 states. That was allocated in the original application. We realized when you all started talking that more than 5 states might be interested in the Tier 2 activities, and particularly in the piloting and field testing. And we also realized that it wasn't just a simple additive math problem. It wasn't each state actually cost $75,000, but that as we added states, that would add to the project costs in terms of things like staffing and travel, that we might have to have more staff involved in the process. We obviously would be traveling to more places. When we threw everything together, and this is really a rough estimate, but it appears to us that the true cost of piloting and field testing is closer to about $125,000 per state. That doesn't mean that we're actually going to increase the budget for that in the application that we've already submitted. But what that means is that if we were to add additional states, that is the rough ballpark or magnitude of cost that we're talking about per state. And I know a number of states have said that it's possible that they might be able to raise some funds within their own state to support this. So hopefully that isn't sticker shock, if you will, that number is something that people can recognize as a possible number for that kind of activity. Again, the piloting is more towards the beginning of our enhancement process when we're piloting individual items, as North Carolina talks about them, situations, probes, tasks. We're working with individual teachers. We're looking at specific aspects of the technology. We're not looking at the entire assessment, but we're looking at it in pieces. Once we get to the field testing, we're actually putting everything together and talking about what's involved in, as Oregon described, when you're implementing in an entire district, and you need to make sure that you're thinking about meeting the needs within that entire district in terms of being able to administer your assessment in a rural school district or an urban school district, in a district that is relatively diverse in terms of English language learners, in terms of poverty levels, in terms of students coming from different backgrounds, and so forth and so on. So anyway, again, this is a rough estimate in terms of what we think additional costs might be. And one of the things that we want to discuss with the states, and we can start that conversation today, but I think it will probably be something that we continue when we have our first face-to-face meeting, and that is some of the characteristics of states that we should be thinking about in terms of selecting those states that are in the pilot and field test sample that's supported by the application versus those states that might be supporting these activities with their own funding. And Jerry, I don't know, did we want to show the survey that that's in draft form right now that gets at some of the kinds of information we would want from states in order to start with the premise that the 5 states that are part of the application are the ones that are the most representative of the situations that we want to capture in our pilot and our field test work? Jerry? Hello?
Hi, sorry, I'm on a cell phone in a hotel room. I don't unmute as fast as I do on my home phone.
No, it was just sort of that scary thought of if I've been talking and there's no one there.
I definitely know that feeling.
So I have a copy of the most recent survey. I don't know whether we were going to, if we want to share that with folks today just to give them an idea of what we're talking about.
I mean, I think if you're comfortable with that, it would be great to share it with them and get their input as to whether this, if there's anything else we might want to be capturing as part of that. So yeah, that would be great.
So again,
Suzanne, this is Cindy. While
yes.
you're bringing that up, I see that there's a question in the chat box that I'm thinking might be. I just noticed it, so I'm thinking it may have come up during your presentation. The question says, "Has the selection process been completed?"
Yes, it's asking. Mark Schaefer wants to know if the selection process has been completed, so perfect timing.
No, it has not. So in the original application, we did not specify which 5 states were being thought about as the Tier 2 states. We assumed when the application was submitted that this would be a process that the 10 consortium states would work out together, and that we also assumed that part of that process would be considering the kind of factors that I have up here on the screen in this survey. And it goes on a little bit here, a little bit further. But what I want to stop and say is, just as Oregon was talking about when they did their pilot work, that they thought about the characteristics of the school districts that they were working in. They needed to think about whether or not those school districts represented the characteristics in their state that they thought would be important in implementing an assessment statewide. So characteristics like some of the demographics that I have up here on the screen. When we look at children, we look at race and ethnicity. We look at poverty in terms of free and reduced lunch. We look at primary language, students with disabilities. Oftentimes we look at rural versus urban. And then we also had a series of questions that we thought had to do more with where the state is with respect to the actual implementation of a kindergarten assessment, or in this case a K-3 assessment. Sort of more process questions. So who has authority over kindergarten programs, who would have the authority over the implementation of a kindergarten assessment tool, and then within a state, likelihood of being able to mandate those assessments, and then anything about the state that would make them particularly uniquely suited to involving in Tier 2 activities, and that might be anything ranging from interest to experience. These were just some initial ideas of information we would collect from states to make sure that the 5 states that are covered in the application, the piloting and field testing that's covered in the application, that those 5 states represent are as representative as possible of states nationally, so that when we talk about the generalizability of the assessment, we can do so in terms of what we've done, particularly with our full-scale field test. And I apologize, I am not seeing questions in the chat box because I have my full screen covered with what you all are seeing. So are there other questions now before we ask one of the things we wanted to ask the states is whether there are other factors that they think we should be considering in selecting states that will be in that sample, that application sample of 5 states.
And Suzanne, there aren't any other questions in the chat box right now, but certainly people should speak up and give their comments.
This is Sue Reed from Maine. I was wondering if you were going to consider regions of the country.
Regions, yes, but we sort of thought we knew that without asking you what region you were in, so we didn't put that on the survey.
Okay.
But good point.
This is Mark Schaefer. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi. So I had I'm filling in for Tara Bit, so I apologize. But 2 questions she had was looking at the timeline, and I think you're kind of explaining that now. But the other was, with states wanting to be Tier 2, is the statement of work changing for the tiers or remaining the same?
The statement of work or the scope of work for a Tier 1 versus a Tier 2 state would stay the same.
Okay.
It's just that more states would be Tier 2.
Okay.
So when we go back to looking at what we were describing here, as the different activities in Tier 1 and Tier 2, all we would be doing is changing so that instead of only 5 states doing these activities here on the bottom of the chart, it would be somewhere between 6 and 10 states, depending on what you all finally decide.
Thank you.
This is Penny Milburn from Iowa. And I wondered, I don't recall seeing within your criteria this concept of the state's ability to gather that assessment data and have it quickly, readily, like immediately available for teaching staff to use to inform their instruction, as well as the state's ability to provide access to the information in the state's longitudinal data system.
And I think those are good factors that we would want to consider.
Okay.
So really what we're doing today is sort of putting this up as this is what we had come up with thus far. And I actually think there are, amongst the research partners, there were some suggestions of other ideas that aren't on this draft yet. But we wanted to get the conversation started for you to tell us what are some of the other factors we should be thinking about. Because exactly that, we knew we hadn't thought of everything.
This is Kat in Arizona.
Uh-huh.
I have a question. If we were selected as one of the 5 states, we would get $75,000. Is that correct?
No.
Oh, okay. I'm just trying to clarify here.
So what we're saying is the original application, we assumed that there would be 5 states who would be involved in the more extensive Tier 2 activities. And when we looked at roughly what we thought that involved, it was approximately $75,000 a state. we never were going to ask the states for that money. It's part of the funding that we received. We were telling the U.S. Department of Education, this is how much we set aside for this.
Okay.
But the question that's been raised is additional states may want to participate in the Tier 2 activities, and we actually welcome that because we think it will be a better assessment for having more states actually involved in the pilot and the field test. So in order to do that, we would have to reach outside the funding. And then the question became, well, is it just another $75,000? And when we went back and looked at our budget, we realized, well, no, actually it'll cost more than that because it's going to involve, for the project as a whole, additional staff, additional travel. And actually that $75,000, when I went back and looked at the budget closely, was probably not the total cost of the pilot efforts and the field test efforts, but that was the figure that was sort of set aside. When I looked at the whole budget and tried to take it apart, that's when the number looked like it was closer to $125,000. Now, what states are telling us is that some of you have other resources that you could designate for this purpose.
Right. Okay, I'm just trying to figure out the money that was originally allocated. Will that be then equally distributed among the states that choose Tier 2? Or will it be for those 5 states that you're selecting?
What we're saying is that in the application we have funding set aside to pay for 5 states to pilot and field test, and if additional states want to do so and have the funds, then we're putting the estimated price tag at closer to $125,000 per state. And then what we're going to have to do, if in fact it is more than 5 states that want to be involved in Tier 2, and thus far, Jerry, I think the information we have is that there are approaching 10 states that are interested. I think it was all but 1 or 2.
Basically, I think everybody but 1 state said they were interested in being considered for Tier 2 status.
So then we would have the situation of having plans for 5 states, but actually having 9 states that are interested. And so we have 2 issues: how to fund those additional 4 states, and then how to select the 5 that are already covered in the grant application.
Well, I mean, and the 10 includes North Carolina, so I guess it would just be 3 more, right?
Right. The original 5, the only state that we stipulated would be in that original 5 of piloting and field testing was North Carolina.
Oh, okay. So North Carolina is considered one of the 5 and not just...
Right.
Okay.
So from a state, this is Penny Milburn from Iowa again, and I know we're getting into the weeds a little bit here.
That's okay.
But the other question has prompted this. So the $75,000 that was set aside, if you happen to be one of the 5 states chosen for Tier 2, could you, Suzanne, explain what that $75,000 does for us? I'm assuming it's things like consultation from you all, travel to our state to work with some of the teachers on site in terms of piloting some of the items, analysis, and then field test of the entire assessments themselves. So is that kind of, it's not like the grant here is going to give each of our states $75,000 and then we're going to use this for infrastructure or whatever. It's really that is it really that the $75,000 supports you all, our consortium, as you travel to our state and assist us with implementation and designing these assessments?
I would say that the $75,000 covers everything, and by that I mean not only the project costs involved in traveling to your state and working with your state, but also any stipends or honoraria that would be paid to involve state staff in the state in the pilot efforts or the field testing. So for example, a very logical expense would be teachers that are going to be involved in this are going to have to be paid stipends. Those would come out of the grant funds for the 5 states.
Okay.
Teachers are going to have to be trained in administering the assessment.
Mm-hmm.
One of the reasons that we want the same 5 states involved in piloting individual pieces of the assessment as actually do the final field test is because there will be some savings both in money but also in time, if you will, in that those same teachers who've had early training with the pilot could then be teachers who are involved in the field testing.
Yeah, that makes sense. So if a state is not chosen but wants to be in Tier 2, is it that the state itself needs to come up basically with about $125,000, and we know that's a little bit of a tentative figure now, or with an additional, say, $50,000 to get up to $125,000? Or, and that, I guess that question goes 2 ways. If you are a chosen Tier 2 state, do you need to come up with an additional $50,000 to help support because the grant is supporting additional states?
And this is why I love doing things that involve budgets where things aren't purely additive. So the assumption is that what we have in the application will cover everything for the 5 states. There is no additional $50,000. But if an additional state above and beyond the 5 states wanted to be involved in Tier 2 activities, we wanted to give you a ballpark estimate of what it would cost your state to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And with all of the costs considered, and again, it's not just taking the number of states and dividing by 5, but or taking the total amount of money involved in piloting and field testing and dividing by 5. But when we look at how it all breaks out, it looks to us like it would cost the grant, the project, roughly $125,000 for that extra state. So a concrete example, let's say that Mississippi was in our consortium. They are not. And they wanted to be in an additional, they wanted to be a Tier 2 state, and they were not selected to be in the sample of 5. They would have to raise $125,000 to support those activities.
Okay, thank you. I thought that's what you were saying, but I wanted to make sure I was totally understanding.
No, I'm glad you asked because it's hard to make this clear. We didn't want to put all of the numbers on slides because we do recognize they are estimates.
Right.
Other questions or suggestions for factors that we should be looking at as we make some decisions about which states would be part of the grant Tier 2 sample? It has also occurred to us that the timing of this decision, on one hand, we might want to try to figure this out early on so that the states that are interested can figure out, when I say figure out which states would be in the sample of 5 early on, because the other states then might want to see if they can raise the funds, or if, for example, they turn out to be one of the Phase 3 Race to the Top Early Learning Challenge states, and they could justify this type of activity as part of that grant. That's a possibility. So knowing sooner might be better. On the other hand, the bulk of these expenses will be incurred in the last year or so of the grant when we do the field test. That'll be the most expensive part of this. And we realize that some circumstances in states may change between now and then. So that would argue for not making this decision quite so early.
Hi, this is Phyllis from Rhode Island. I had a question. So have we talked with psychometricians and folks to ensure that only having 5 states and pulling the representative sample from them is going to be sufficient to make the claim that the results and the standard setting are based on are applicable to all of the states involved?
when we looked at putting 5 states as Tier 2 states in the application, we had those considerations whether or not psychometrically that would be sufficient, and we came to the conclusion that it would be. I think the Department of Ed has also agreed with us by funding our application as is and not suggesting that we needed to add additional states to our field test.
And I have some slight concerns about that, but that aside, I'm just trying to think through the cost of it. Is it the expectation that those states who are chosen are going to do a full census of their population that participate in this, or is it a small sample that you're asking states to do?
It is not a full census. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but it's a as Oregon talked about, doing their original pilot work. I think they said 16 districts or 16. Oregon, help me out here. It was a smaller number of.
It was 13 districts and 16 schools.
Right. So you did multiple schools in some districts. It would be what I want to convey is it would be the same kind of idea where we would do targeted sampling within a state. So we wouldn't be trying to do a census at all.
Right, so you'd be basing that on various variables to ensure you're getting the appropriate demographics of kids living in poverty, of English language learners, of students with disabilities, of boys, of girls, all of those kinds of demographics to make sure we have a representative sample.
Right. And that would be representative within the state. The other thing I point out when you ask about whether 5 states is enough to be able to make claims about generalizability, keep in mind that we're developing an assessment across 10 states, and we feel that consortium of 10 states is relatively representative of the United States. But that was never the Department of Ed's intention, that we would have an assessment that would necessarily be administered in every state. Because as we saw, what the Department of Ed chose to do was to fund 3 different approaches to kindergarten assessment, whether that approach is embedded in a K-3 assessment as is North Carolina's, or other models. And so that the notion of 5 states out of 10 as opposed to 5 out of 50 is probably a more reasonable way of looking at it.
And so would the plan be then to determine like cut points and standards after the first operational assessment? So after all states are participating in it, you have data from all the states, then to determine some benchmarks of what the data means? Or is that going to be done based on the field test?
Most of that's going to be done based on the field test. We'll get some of the psychometric properties of the individual items from the piloting.
Yeah, and individual items, but in terms of then putting all of those items into a test and determining what does it mean when you get, these 10 items right versus 20 items right.
That's all done based on the field test work, where we're looking at the entire assessment and a larger sample.
And is there and I'm sorry I'm coming into this, I'm not involved on all of the calls, but who are the psychometricians that we're working with? Do we have a committee of folks like that who we're working with? I'm assuming we are, I'm not aware.
Yeah, that was covered in the application. We have psychometricians here at SRI, and we also have included some expert consultants in the project that are going to provide psychometric support. I think we're using one of the same folks that North Carolina is using, Rich Lambert.
Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. So I guess, Jerry, one question for the group just to close might be to get a sense of whether the states feel that it would be worth all of our time for them to share this kind of information with us to help us, and some of the suggestions that have been added to help us make decisions about the 5 states that would be included in the original application sample, so that we could then move on with the issue of whether additional states are going to want to also be involved in the Tier 2 activities and be able to support that.
Yeah, so I think if we can finalize the application, so to speak, that we created based on some of the input today, then we could get it out to everyone, and those who definitely wanted to be considered for participation would complete that information and get it back into us. I know you felt like since it's a longer-term timeline, we probably didn't need to get it out right away, Suzanne. Is that what you're feeling, or would it be better to go ahead and get it out so people have some clarity about this?
Well, I could see it both ways, but I think on balance, if we continue to have more than 5 states interested, those states that would have to be finding additional funds would probably appreciate having the time to do so. Right. So on balance, we probably want to do it sooner rather than later.
Does anyone else have anything else they'd like to see added to this criteria before we send it out?
Trying to make it big enough so you can see it all without.
If you hit it, if you look at a full screen, they can see it pretty well. That's what I had to do on my baby computer in this hotel room. And it's we're hoping that what we've included is information you guys can get pretty easily. We're hoping it's just data that generally is available. So if it's not something that's available, let us know that as well. Well, we see we got about 20 minutes left, so if nobody has any other comments, can we move on? So I'll hand it back to you, Cindy. Or do you want me to do this part?
Yeah, why don't you, so you're talking about the getting input for the in-person meeting?
Uh-huh.
Yes. I would love for you to facilitate that conversation.
All right, so we're very disappointed that it's not going to work out for us to do the January meeting, and I know from some of you that I've heard from that you are as well. We were really looking forward to meeting everybody and getting this started. But hopefully this contracting process and grant-making process is going to be resolved fairly quickly, and we can get back to you with a new date that you can get on your calendar. In the meantime, we wanted to go ahead and at least start to get your input on what you'd like to see as part of this meeting so that we make it fully worth your while once we're all together. So if you would be willing to share their thoughts about what you think should be included, that would be helpful as part of this discussion. We would love to hear from you. Anybody want to jump in? This is what we were looking forward to at the in-person meeting. We'd have to have you all talking then.
Hi, this is Sue again from Maine, and it would help me to think about what some specific activities are if you could maybe talk about your goals for this meeting.
All right. Does anybody want to take that question? We kind of talked in general about what our goals were for the meeting. In the original structure for it, we talked about using the first half of the day to focus on the standards part of the project. since that's starting to move along. And then the other day and a half, some of the things we talked about was, part of this was going to be the kickoff to how we work together, and to learn more about what we were all doing in our states and how that connected with this process, and then how we better connected you into the developmental process that North Carolina is going through as well. Because part of why North Carolina got into this was because they wanted your input into this process. They wanted to learn from what you were doing and to get your experience to inform the developmental process for this K-3 assessment. So that was a big part of what we hope to accomplish as well. And then to get into some of the logistics of the project and the details as well. So those were some of the ideas that we had tossed around. Suzanne or Jennifer or Cindy, other ideas you want to add?
So this is Cindy. I think you've already touched on the idea of, this is really our first opportunity to get to know each other and learn about the work in a formal way that each of us is involved in. I made a note while we were talking earlier that, I know when I hear other people talk about their work around KEA, and the question was specifically asked, okay, so how does this consortium that we're engaged in affect the work we're currently doing? And I think it'd be lovely to have some time on the agenda to just kind of do some brainstorming around that. I think I don't know about that at this point in time, but I think it'd be helpful for us to at least be able to put that out on the table. That probably involves some anxieties on some of our parts and some optimism and excitement, but I think if we could have some opportunity to do some brainstorming about that and thinking out loud together, then that might be good as well.
This is JC from Maine. That was very helpful, Cindy. I think the other thing that would be helpful for us, we've had a work group that's been looking at sort of what is the birth through age 8 comprehensive assessment framework, of which we've discussed in the field, that this certainly is one piece of it. But it was also helpful with both Oregon and North Carolina to talk about stakeholder engagement. And I'd really like to have some discussion about what were some of the expectations when you wrote the grant about what would be the makeup of the stakeholder groups? What's the timing? Should we begin doing that, or do we want to have some consistency in terms of how we've approached the stakeholder groups and we can learn from those that have done it on a sort of an expedited time frame? What learnings have you had so that we make sure we don't hit the same potholes?
Those are all great, JC, and those are definitely all things that are on our mind as well. So
okay.
That's an important discussion to have. Thank you.
Should we in fact wait until we've had a chance to sort of get together and have that discussion before we start within state or within the SEA brainstorming? Because my sense is you may want some consistency in terms of what our approach is.
What would you say to that, Suzanne and Jennifer?
Well, I think from the point of view of consistency, and I also would like to hear from Child Trends on this, but I think it really has more to do with being able to benefit from the lessons learned in other states.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
And less to do with some kind of a research methodology where we want you all to do things exactly the same.
Okay.
That makes sense.
I very much appreciate that.
And Kelly had to sign off, so we don't have anybody from Child Trends on right now.
Oh, okay. I didn't see that. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Cindy and I are meeting with Kelly next week, though, so we'll talk about this some then as well. Any other thoughts?
This is Mark from North Dakota again. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yep.
I know we're ending, so I know I can't get all these questions in. But in general, there was quite a few questions that I had on the standards regarding things like the timeline for the alignment, whether or not they're being aligned to state standards, North Carolina or others, expectations of state revisions. Is there a time where that kind of discussion will take place where we can look at some of these questions on the alignment of the standards, the process, and possible costs that you might see in that?
We'll definitely be talking about the standards in a segment of the meeting for sure. Originally, when it was planned for January, it was going to be the first half day. Catherine Scott Little and Lynn Kagan, though, will be addressing some of those questions sooner versus later now since we're not doing the January meeting. So they'll be, I would think they'll be talking about some of that at the January 22nd conference call that she's emailed everyone about.
Yep.
But in the meantime, reach out to them directly and ask some of these questions too.
Okay. Thank you.
Great. Anyone else? Well, we apologize again for the postponement of the meeting, and we'll definitely let you know a date sooner versus later. And we will look forward to a fantastic meeting when we are all together. Good, Cindy, I'll pass it back to you.
Okay, thank you, Jerry and Suzanne and Kelly, who's left us, and all of the rest. Are there any final comments or questions before we sign off for the day? So if something comes to finish, email or Jerry or any of the research partners if there is something further that we need to discuss. Otherwise, we have another call scheduled for February 12th.
I will send a link out for the recording for this call for those that weren't able to be on. And I guess as a reminder, too, as you're developing resources you think might be helpful to everyone else, if you'll share those, we are setting up a web area where you'll be able to access those later on. So we'd love to get anything you have, and your great experience will inform everyone else's. So Cindy just sent a message. She somehow got kicked off, which her voice was breaking up, so I have a feeling that was why. If there's nothing else, we will go ahead and close out and wish everybody a happy holiday and a happy new year. We look forward to talking in 2014. Take care. Bye.
Okay.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
All right. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Please stand by.